Hello, and thank you for attending this video. I'm Brian with EMF Protection. I've invited Christina Lucia Zampiero in on this interview because I found her in searching the internet for issues with wireless technologies inside daycares and schools, particularly because I have a grandson who is now in a daycare, and I know what I've had to do in my own home for protection, and I was concerned about that. And I found this great information that Christina put out there that was involved in, and I thought this would be a good message for people to hear. So, Christina, tell us about what was going on for you that had you approach. It was a daycare, I believe. Oh,
Yeah.
yes, approach this daycare with concerns that you had and what your experience was.
Well, I'd just become a mom, and it was my child in that specific daycare. And when you become a parent, you just start to do all the research to protect that kid. And I became aware that all schools and daycares are using these commercial routers to provide Wi-Fi for the space. And, you know, uh, the more research I did, the more I saw really good evidence that that was not a good idea, particularly because this two-way microwave radiation involves a pulse. And when our bodies have an electromagnetic field, and when you pulse, uh, when exterior fields interfere with that, you lose balance mentally and physically. You need that balance within your own field to have health. And then I saw the NTP study with the U.S. toxicology did in the U.S. a $25 million 10-year study that was supposed to prove that it didn't harm anyone, and it found clear evidence of cancer, which was the highest classification. And I thought, well, what's going on with the Canadian health standards? So I looked at Code 6, and then I saw that our health standards hadn't been updated in since '79, really, other than some minor amendments. And I thought, whoa, something's seriously wrong with our public safety standards. They're not protective at all. This technology is being rolled out very, very quickly. I'm not sure why it entered the schools. World Health has it classified as a type 2B human carcinogen. That's a possible carcinogen, soon to be upgraded. And I thought, why is this in the school? So my plan was to talk to the moms. There was a board of directors. It's a not-for-profit daycare. And I thought, speak to the moms' hearts. You'll get what you need. So I brought in all this research that I found. I get some really big studies, Kaiser Permanente, and the electrodes on the mother's bellies. And then the conclusion of that test was 3 times more likely to miscarry. I mean, there's countless studies. There's literally thousands of them. So I found the ones that were the most compelling, along with some videos from Toronto Women's College, where they talk about admitting all of these people with EMF sensitivity illness, and how the government's not caught up with the science. So the doctors don't know what they're looking at, and that's problematic. So the moms in the room at the time of the board meeting listened. They understood that I was there to protect my child and their kids. And I got a lot of nods. I used my best abilities. I tried to be as compelling as I could, and yet, just tried to inform them. So the nods led to a vote, which led to, let's apply the precautionary principle here. And in case, can you still hear me okay?
That was my phone. I apologize.
Oh, no,
I've
no worries. I
unplugged
didn't
it.
hear it. I didn't hear it. I just saw you weren't, your lips were moving, but I couldn't hear your voice. Anyway, so I got the moms nodding. They did a vote. They said, why unnecessarily put these kids at risk? Very mature moms, and decided to hardwire the daycare Ethernet cords. They had somebody in. They got it all set up. They made sure the wireless capabilities they were turned off on all the computers, the tablets, the music makers, And I was quite pleased. So there's a lot of power in talking to to parents. You know, this from what I hear, especially from the United States, this has to be done from the bottom up. This is not a top down. Our agencies are captured by industry, that their influence is far too strong. They have, you know, they find these corruptible scientists who need cash, wave the cash, and then if they're willing to lie for them, they put them to head these committees, including the Royal something of Canada, who helps to keep the public safety standards as bad as they are.
Right.
So
right.
yeah, so there's a lot of captured people, and so industry's had its way. But so, these people will
just, you've walked us through, you went to a meeting, you spoke to the parents, you got a lot of nods. At the end of the day, what kind of advancements did you see happen in the actual daycare in the school?
So the first level was to turn off the Wi-Fi and have the staff turn off their cell phones. I went a step further and I asked that the cordless phones be switched. Now, RF, cordless phones, cell phones, routers, they all fall in within the spectrum of microwave radiation, and they all needed to be turned off in that enclosed space in order to have favorable levels of, no level of exposure is good, but you want it not in the red. When I say in the red, my meter indicates that anything over 0.5 is where people experience symptoms. So, and I wasn't comfortable about having it in the red. So when I went after the cordless phones, I got some pushback. I also suggested a cookie tin called like a cell motel, where if people forgot to turn off their phones, if the staff had phones, that they could put them in this cookie tin, and you could mitigate, emissions with the aluminum box. It really only takes a few layers of aluminum to stop the signal. So I got pushback there too. They weren't willing to kind of follow through on the rest. So the Wi-Fi went off, the tablets everything was wired, and the phones, the staff cell phones, I don't know if they went off or not, but and they also didn't want to put a sign on the door. They were afraid of what parents would say if they said, hey, turn off your cell phone before coming in. We try to keep our kids safe in the same spirit of no peanuts and no fragrances. We want to keep our kids safe from RF, leave your phone in the car or whatever. So, because there are certain kids that are going to react with electrosensitivity symptoms. And then it's kind of a slippery slope because it's hard to escape it.
So there's the electrosensitivity symptoms. Was it simply the electrosensitivity symptoms that you were after, or was it the longer term absorption of these radio frequencies in kids that can lead to complications down the road? Did you have both in mind?
Well, of course. I mean, nobody knows the cumulative effects over a lifetime of exposure. And this generation of kids are the first kids that were born into Wi-Fi and are exposed to it 24/7.
Right. It's that what you said.
We don't know those effects.
You don't know them yet.
So yes. And I think we're still in a bit of a latency period where it's accumulation of toxins that we have to release. And once they get to a threshold, then you start to see symptoms. If you're really sensitive, you'll have symptoms sooner. It's, I think it's probably, I'm not sure about the numbers, so I shouldn't mention them, but it might be around the peanut allergy number where people are having active symptoms right away. And then there's a delayed response for others. But everybody, whether you feel it or not, is being bombarded by this pulse. So whether it's irrelevant if you feel it. If you feel it, it's protective in a sense that you can get away from it. But if you don't feel it, you might just end up I mean, it causes terrible behavioral issues in kids. It's agitating to be pulsed upon, and they're finding. I'm hearing friends talk about 9-year-old girls with anxiety and like the heart palpitations. And my colleague who helped me with Torontonians for Safe Technology has the tinnitus that happens. When I turned off the Wi-Fi, I was getting itchy hives, and those went away. That was how I knew that I was slightly electrosensitive. So we hosted Martin Paul this summer, and he actually stayed with me and said, you know, Chrissy, that's a slippery slope. You want to be very, you want to control the exposure you have, because, you know, once you have symptoms, it's hard to heal from it because we're so overexposed.
I'm in that same boat. So I'm actually inside of a Faraday cage room right now. The walls are painted. All of the electricity, including the electricity flung at this house in the air from cell towers and such, have they hit this wall, and they reflect off, and the electricity and the wires in the wall actually are grounded out. So they run along the surface of the wall and don't actually penetrate. The fields don't actually penetrate into the living space. So I know exactly what you're talking about in that sense. Yeah. Now, with what's so important to me, and it sounds like to you as well, and that most people aren't aware of, is that when you and I grew up, it was background radiation. We might have had some radar, we might have had some radio, like FM radio, but nothing pulsed, right, at that time. But it wasn't pulsing data like the technologies do today at the frequency levels they've chosen to fill out with what is taken over from the background radiation. So kids, including ourselves, seem to be exposed to these stressors 24/7. So we are in our home and we're inundated with it. Then we go to the child care and they're inundated with it. Then they evolve to school and they're inundated with it. So I really admire what you are doing in communicating those things and standing up for it. So families seem to be able to control what's in their home, but the ones that have knowledge of it or awareness, most don't.
Yeah.
So the kids are impacted by these things. What do you think is the likelihood that more daycares will listen to this kind of approach?
Well, I think daycares might be a sweet spot because they don't have the regulatory bodies that the, say, Peel's school board has, where, you know, huge amounts of money have flowed in in tech somehow. You know, there's a leak in the roof, but everybody's got a tablet, if you know what I mean. There's no computer labs anymore. We used to be pretty safely plugged in back then, where if the device is plugged in a computer lab, it doesn't emit in the same way. So now we have all these free floating, everything's attached to a router. And I was just at a Christmas concert at the public school, and every 10 feet is a booster in the ceiling, and the ceilings aren't that high. So it's a pretty dense environment, the Wi-Fi. Veronica, my colleague in Torontonians for Safe Technology, is on the PTA, and so she's trying to slowly turn the tides a little bit there with saying, you know, maybe there's a designated time when we do that kind of, you know, the tablet work, and then we turn it off just to give these kids a break. Because I would say there's a good portion of parents who, there's that cognitive dissonance that happens where it's so pervasive, it's so everywhere, that when you tell somebody that something they can't smell or see or feel is hurting them, they want to reject it until it's really mainstream, until there's big class action lawsuits and there's bodies to count and sick people. But it's like the maturity that we need, the maturity to catch it beforehand. I mean, even my own friends and family, I don't know that they're all turning off this Wi-Fi at night, and they know how passionate I am about it. I just feel like it's like, who did I hear say it? Someone was saying it like, it's like adolescence before an exam. In order to get the mojo to study for the exam, they wait for the last second. It's like we're rolling this stuff out so in such a rush, and it's kind of secretive the way they're putting up the 5G, the next generation of wireless. Kind of nobody really knows where it's going, how it's going to operate. It's, they're kind of trying to get it out there really quick before people start to worry. And but it hasn't been, none of the tech has gone through appropriate safety testing. So there's an immaturity here that we're dealing with. Like, why not think this one through a little bit? We already have sick people. We already intuitively, it does mount a bit of an instinct in us not to pulse on our babies all day long. I mean, it kind of, most people I ask say, yeah, that doesn't seem completely sound to be doing that. So why not test it first? Now, the reason why the industry is not testing it first is because it would never be allowed to roll out. It's not a logical upgrade, 3, 4, 5G. It's cumulative. It's 3 plus 4 plus 5. So it's just going to send out new frequencies and pretty dangerous frequencies compared to some of the ones in other countries. So why not just do it the right way? Why are we being childish? Just like we did, it took us decades to get to the bottom of tobacco and so much collateral damage. So we can do better.
If I may interrupt,
sure.
This is an interesting path of discussion because you mentioned Dr. Martin Pall. And when he's asked about 5G, I've seen him say, well, what we have, the 3 and the 4G is already biologically active on our bodies. It's already creating the challenges and the health disease endpoints. And there's other doctors, scientists that have these studies. He's proven the science. The Ramazzini Institute in Italy has proven the science on rats. And so what's being pushed on us seems to be like the tobacco industry. The industry sits back and just says, oh, and more studies need to be done, but they've been done, and they dismiss it until they can no longer dismiss it, as you mentioned earlier in the interview, the body count. And so we there's proof that shows back as early as the 60s and the 70s that they knew that this stuff was harmful. And they've just rolled it out, and it's big dollars and it's profitability. But the other sick thing about it is that we love it. Our kids love to sit there with their iPad on their belly, blasting full-on Wi-Fi. There's only seems to be certain people that will listen to this, and our kids have to go into the same educational institutions where the rule of the day seems to be accept the technology, and anybody that says the technology is harmful is kind of banished, right? The scientists certainly have been. Yeah, and so I don't know what the answer is, but how would parents who are concerned have a voice? Where would they take their voice? Try and get some movement on this. The parents who are aware and concerned.
Well, it's all about the parental pressure. All you need is a few families, and believe me, schools are kind of run almost like for profit. They don't want to lose their students. There is a little leverage there when you have enough parents who are concerned, and they take it, first to the principal, then to the trustees. I mean, there was an email that went out that went around that Canadians for Safe Technology responded to that said, please don't talk about wireless at the PTA. Don't talk about it at the meetings. We really need to suppress this subject. And people that were bringing it up at the PTA meetings were being called bullies because they had concerns for health. And, it's rough with the school board. There's maybe we just had a victory actually yesterday. One of the MPs, they found a rock star MP in Etobicoke, and some of the women from our group actually were involved in the school in Etobicoke, St. Gregory. They just moved a tower. Was it T-Mobile wanted to put the tower right next door? They mounted enough of a response. That tower is not going up. So it works. We had a few towers here that we got moved. We're working on another one here. Even in the rural areas, I live in a very rural area, and we're having to speak up about towers in the middle of a field. So it's about the people. Once you get informed yourself and you really sell it to yourself, then you talk to other parents and you find that, where it resonates for them. And then you have power. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I feel like I'm more powerful than I am, but I really feel like that one voice, when it's speaking reason, as opposed to all this fluff that we need driverless cars. Who wanted that? And it's fluff, really. Like, it's so the frivolity of the things that 5G wants to offer us, besides maybe like medical interventions. But if it means putting a transmitter, a military grade antenna outside on each light pole, what's the cost of this technology? How much? And then where are the accommodations for people who don't tolerate it? I mean, you can't even go walk your dog if it's on the antennas. And then sometimes they put them on the front lawns in the ground. So you can't go I was just at a gorgeous provincial park, and the osprey nest was up on the tower. It was like, you think you're going to go for a hike. And so it's a long rabbit hole, but it's something that I'm not sure whose lifetime it's going to change in, but that's none of my business. My only business is to do what I can in this moment for the people around me. And, I can already feel a trickle effect. I really can. You're not the first person who's emailed me. I feel like there's people out there, and they kind of cheer you on, whether they're willing to speak up or not. They've changed. Their field has changed, and that's going to influence the next guy. So the more one guy wakes up, I really believe in that, like by osmosis or whatever you want to call it, people do come to their senses. So
yeah. So I wanted to keep this interview short, and it's so easy to just bring up so many.
I could talk for days.
And so could I, and I could listen for days. So is there I have a couple of things that I wanted to bring up about your points, but is there anything else that is significantly important that you think would be valuable in this interview?
You know what? It's no, just that I feel like there's a personal responsibility. Not everybody has to feel that way, but I feel that way. That knowing what I know, I can't unknow it. And now it's my responsibility to inform gently, because people don't want to be told, it's not fire and brimstone. This is real. If it makes you feel uncomfortable or a little bit fearful, I'm not manipulating you into feeling fearful. It's an appropriate reaction to feel fearful about something that's going to get out of control. And once it's up, it might be harder to stop. Talk to your neighbors and friends, and do what you can. Hold a screening of Generation Zapped. Make them watch 20 minutes. Serve good snacks. Do what you can. That's where I'm at today.
Beautiful. Okay. And just in closing, I have some thoughts. The 5G, for example, all of those antennas that they put close to the houses that are coming through the windows, it's actually not faster speed than Ethernet or fiber optic. So I've heard from some experts that the reason the industry is going with 5G, and it's a money thing, is because they don't have any cap on revenues. In the wireless world, there's no cap on revenues. So they actually support those 5G networks with land-based fibers up to a certain point, and then they launch it into the 5G, which is the millimeter waves at different high frequencies, into the home, and it's directional. So if you're driving in a car, you're not going to be on 5G. It's going to bounce you on to 4G. It's hard enough to track a car on 4G. But if you're in your home and you're on your device and you're stationary and the 5G is in place, and your phone is equipped for 5G, it'll beam the signal, but everything in between that signal is getting the 5G go right through it. Not so good. Mm-hmm. So when I grew up in Mississauga, I grew up probably 300 meters, maybe 250 meters away from the massive hydro field. Mm-hmm. There were homes that backed right up to it. We used to play under these things. I can tell you there were kids that died of cancer. I shake a little bit when I say that because I'm fortunate I wasn't one of them. I'm 52 and I don't, knock on wood, I've been around technology and you never know what can happen. But the inundation of all of these technologies is saturating us. And so in my business, what I do is I will go around to people's homes and offices and schools, and I will use detection instruments like the one you showed, and I will uncover these things for people, paint the picture, show them the science, and then they can at least make a decision. Hey, is this the kind of exposure that we want to mitigate from our family's exposure? And if you can't do it in the school and you can't homeschool, then doesn't it just make sense to turn all of that stuff off for the child in the place that they sleep? After all, that's the place that our bodies produce melatonin. That's the melatonin that goes through. It's the wonder drug that mops up all the free radicals which are known to cause the cancer. And when we're sleeping, we're in that restorative, reparative state. And if we don't have it, and what happens is that pineal sensors actually don't know the difference between light and these foreign man-made non-native frequencies that are pelting the body. And so we don't necessarily go into that circadian rhythm, that deep sleep, that melatonin production, and that needs to be mitigated. And that's kind of what we do. So what you're doing in terms of being a voice is so important, and what we're doing in terms of helping people in their homes is also so important. And I really appreciate you coming on this interview to express that. And I hope that the people that are listening, reach out to either of us and let us know what you're thinking. It can only create some kind of energy and movement towards getting on top of this, either in our own lives or from a community standpoint.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in for 1 second. I love public speaking, and I've offered, and I haven't gotten any invitations, but I've offered to take my presentation to anybody's school on behalf of anybody's kids. I do need a few parents on board in order to, yeah, and then there's a lot of flack you get when you do those meetings, but mine went very smoothly actually, but I'm willing to come and talk for you. Or you can use the presentation, chop it up and use it any way you see fit. Of course, email me any help I can be of. I'd like to do that. I'm quite passionate about it.
That's great. That's great. Okay. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.